The full moon hung low over the horizon, casting a ghostly silver light across the snow-covered plains. Frost clung to the wooden beams of Livia Hart's cabin, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the shutters like a chorus of restless spirits. Inside, the warmth of the small stove barely kept the biting cold at bay. Livia sat hunched over a rough-hewn table, ink-stained fingers trembling as she traced the outline of a letter she would never send. Her husband had been gone a year, claimed by a fever that swept through the town with ruthless speed, leaving her grief-stricken, lonely, and wary of the world beyond these four walls. The scratch of her pen stopped abruptly as a knock echoed against the door hard, deliberate and impossible to ignore. Livia's breath hitched. The wind outside seemed to pause, carrying the faint, metallic scent of iron and pine smoke into her cabin. Her instincts screamed danger, yet there was something in the rhythm of the knock that suggested purpose rather than malice. She rose slowly, wrapping a wool shawl around her shoulders, the rough fabric scratching against her skin. The floorboards creaked beneath her weight as she approached the door, every nerve in her body alert. A second knock followed, heavier this time, resonating through the cabin like a warning drum. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. She barely recognized the sound of it, so thin, fragile, and uncertain. A deep, resonant voice answered, calm but commanding. "A friend. If you let me in." The words were simple, yet carried the weight of someone who had seen the wilderness, survived its trials, and carried secrets he would not reveal lightly. Livia hesitated. 1 year of isolation had made her cautious, but curiosity, and something deeper and unacknowledged, longing pulled her forward. Her hand trembled as she unlatched the door and pulled it open. Snowflakes clung to the edges of the frame, drifting down in the silver light. And there he was, a tall, broad-shouldered figure, his bronzed skin glinting beneath the moonlight, long black hair cascading over furs that smelled of leather, smoke, and the untamed earth. Turquoise and silver adorned his neck and wrists, glinting faintly in the cold light. His eyes, dark and steady, held a story of loss and survival, and for a heartbeat, Livia felt as though he could see straight through the walls she had built around her heart. "Apache?" she whispered, disbelief and awe threading her voice. He inclined his head slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I travel alone," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You will not regret this." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter, the warmth of the cabin rushing to meet him. His presence seemed to absorb the chill, yet brought with it a tension she could not name, a mix of fear, fascination, and something dangerously alluring. He removed his gloves, revealing calloused hands, scarred but capable, and hung his furs by the fire. He crouched to tend the small stove, sparks flying as he adjusted the firewood. Livia watched, captivated by the careful precision in his movements, the way every action seemed deliberate, measured, a man attuned to survival in a harsh world. "I am Livia," she said finally, finding her voice. Who are you?" He paused, turning slightly, his dark eyes glinting. "Tawaki," he said simply. "I have traveled far. The storm drove me here." The wind howled again outside, rattling the shutters and shaking the cabin to its core. Livia shivered, but not from the cold. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile connection forged in silence and circumstance. Tawaki's presence stirred something in her she had not felt in a long time, hope, or perhaps the dangerous thrill of letting someone into her life again. "Do you need food?" she asked, her voice small, cautious. "I can wait," he said, though the faint curve of his lips suggested he would accept whatever she offered. "I only need to rest." She nodded, leading him toward a rough chair by the fire. The room smelled of pine, smoke, and old wood, and for the first time in a year, the emptiness of the cabin felt less oppressive. Tawaki settled by the flames, his gaze distant, as though he carried 1,000 memories in his dark eyes. As Livia returned to her table, pencil in hand, she realized her grief had softened, not entirely, but enough for the possibility of companionship, trust, and perhaps even something more. Outside, the snow fell silently, the wind carrying whispers of what was to come. And in the stillness of that cold winter night, two strangers, both marked by loss, began a story neither could have anticipated. The night had grown colder, the wind shrieking like a wounded animal across the plains. Livia stirred a small pot over the fire, the steam curling around her face, while Tawaki, silent, steady, and imposing, sat near the doorway, watching the snow dance in the moonlight. His muscles gleamed faintly in the firelight, scars and sinew speaking of years surviving the wilds. Livia couldn't stop stealing glances at him. There was something mesmerizing in the way he moved, even in stillness, as though the land itself respected his presence. A sudden shout outside made her drop the spoon with a clatter. Footsteps pounded against the snow, crisp and urgent. The door rattled violently. Livia's heart leapt. She had not expected company, none she wanted. At least, Tawaki rose without a word, moving with a predator's grace to the door. His hand brushed against her shoulder, not to push her back, but to anchor her fear, and she felt the strength in his touch. "Stay behind me," he murmured, low and steady, and the tone of command left no room for protest. Through the moonlit snow, Livia could make out a group of figures, horse thieves by their posture and crude leather coats. Their boots sank into the drifts as they circled the cabin, searching. One of them spat onto the ground, a harsh sound that seemed louder than it should in the still night. "They're after something," Livia whispered. "Or someone." Tawaki's jaw tightened. "They will find neither." With a sudden, fluid motion, he unfastened a hidden latch at the side of the cabin and pulled back a weathered plank. A narrow tunnel yawned in the shadows, leading under the cabin and out into the frozen woods. "Quickly," he urged. "Follow me." Livia hesitated only a moment before ducking into the tunnel, the cold biting her neck as snow drifted in through cracks above. Tawaki went first, a dark silhouette moving silently, every step precise, every muscle poised for action. The tunnel opened onto a hidden creek lined with pines, their branches heavy with snow. Tawaki led her deeper into the forest until they reached a small cave concealed behind a frozen waterfall. Inside, the cave smelled of wet stone and pine sap, damp but safe. Tawaki knelt near the mouth of the cave and struck flint against rock. Sparks danced and caught a pile of dry leaves and kindling, sending a small flame licking toward the ceiling. Livia exhaled, letting relief wash over her. "You should rest," Tawaki said, his voice echoing softly against the stone walls. "It will be a long night." Livia sat near the fire, rubbing her hands together. Why are you helping me?" she asked, curiosity piercing the fear still clinging to her chest. Tawaki paused, eyes distant. "I have traveled long, seen too much death to ignore a chance to protect someone who cannot protect herself. That is all." He removed a small carved amulet from beneath his furs, turquoise glinting in the firelight. "This was my wife's," he murmured, almost to himself. "She is gone. I wander, carrying her memory. I do not forget, and I will not allow harm to touch you if I can prevent it." Livia's throat tightened. You lost someone too," she said softly, understanding for the first time the depth of his silence, the weight behind his dark eyes. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the distant curses of the horse thieves as they searched for the cabin. Tawaki listened intently, every muscle tensed, every movement controlled. Then he glanced back at Livia, a faint smile brushing his lips. "We are safe. For now," he said. Hours passed in near silence. The fire sputtered, casting shadows across the jagged stone walls. Livia finally allowed herself to relax, though she kept glancing at him, captivated by his quiet strength, his unwavering vigilance. She had survived winter storms, loneliness, and grief, but this night with him felt like something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something alive. Finally, she curled up in a corner of the cave, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. Tawaki remained near the fire, his eyes scanning the forest through the cave's mouth. Before sleep claimed her, Livia realized that in Tawaki, she saw not just a protector, but a living bridge between the wild and the world. She had shut herself away from a man forged by loss, yet capable of offering trust and something like hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering footprints, erasing tracks. The world was silent, save for the crackling fire and the presence of two souls, one wary, one stoic, sharing warmth in the wilderness, bound together by circumstance, danger, and the fragile beginnings of trust. The wind had softened to a cold whisper by morning, but the forest still groaned under the weight of snow. Tawaki led Livia along a narrow trail toward the abandoned silver mine, its entrance half hidden behind fallen timber and ice-coated rocks. The mine had been deserted for decades, though the faint scent of damp earth and rusted metal lingered. Livia's stomach churned uneasily. There was something about the hollow mouth of the mine that spoke of past secrets, danger, and lost souls. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked, shivering beneath her thick shawl. The snow had melted in patches, revealing jagged rocks that threatened to twist an ankle with every step. Tawaki's dark eyes scanned the area. "It is the safest place we can hide supplies. No one comes here willingly." His voice was low and steady, but Livia sensed a protective edge in every word. He moved with the effortless confidence of a man who had survived harsher lands than this, every step precise, every motion deliberate. The entrance loomed before them, a yawning black maw into the mountain. Tawaki stepped inside first, the shadow swallowing his tall, muscular frame. His bare torso gleamed faintly under the weak shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the mine walls. Livia hesitated, then followed, feeling the temperature drop several degrees as she crossed the threshold. Inside, the mine smelled of wet stone and old iron, the air thick and still. Water dripped rhythmically from stalactites above, echoing through the tunnels like the heartbeat of some ancient beast. Tawaki moved silently, his hand resting occasionally on the wall to guide her through the labyrinthine passageways. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed behind them. A ceiling support had weakened, and a shower of small rocks tumbled down, narrowly missing Tawaki. Without hesitation, he grabbed Livia's arm, yanking her out of the way, his strength both terrifying and comforting. The sound of her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she stared at his dark, unwavering eyes. "Careful," he murmured, brushing a lock of snow-dusted hair from his face. "These tunnels remember every misstep." They ventured deeper into the mine, where faint traces of old mining carts and rusted tools hinted at the lives that had once worked here. Tawaki pointed to a narrow side passage. "Here," he said, "we will store the supplies. It will be hidden from any who follow us." Livia watched him work, marveling at the quiet precision with which he moved. He lifted crates with ease, stacking them against a recessed wall, arranging tools and food as if orchestrating some meticulous plan. Even in the dim light, the muscles of his arms and chest were evident, every scar telling a story of survival and hardship. She couldn't deny the strange warmth that bloomed in her chest, the mixture of admiration, attraction, and trust that had begun to take root. Once the supplies were secured, Tawaki motioned for her to sit. The flicker of a small lantern illuminated his bronze skin and the intricate tribal jewelry he wore: turquoise beads, silver armbands, and leather straps. The shadows danced across his features, revealing the quiet pain he carried in his eyes. "You've seen much," Livia said softly, breaking the silence. "I can see it in your eyes. You lost someone." Tawaki's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the dark tunnel ahead. "My wife. She died defending our village. I wandered after, searching, surviving, carrying her memory." His voice was heavy, yet steady, a quiet strength beneath his sorrow. "And now I protect those who cannot protect themselves." Her fingers tightened around her shawl. "I lost my husband a year ago," she admitted. I thought I could live alone. But after you saved me, I don't know. I feel something I haven't felt in a long time, hope, or maybe just relief." Tawaki's gaze softened for the first time, and he nodded. "You are strong, Livia, stronger than you believe. But the world is harsh, and we must be careful." Hours passed as they waited in silence, the wind outside rattling the rocks and the distant caw of a crow echoing through the mine shafts. Livia felt a strange comfort in Tawaki's presence, a warmth that went beyond the firelight. He did not speak much, yet every glance, every careful motion, communicated a depth of care and protection she could not have imagined. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting faint light into the mine entrance, Livia realized something important. The wilderness no longer felt entirely empty. With Tawaki by her side, she was no longer just a lonely widow. She was a woman beginning to trust, to live, and perhaps to hope again. The forest behind them had finally thinned, giving way to the distant outline of a frontier town, smoke curling lazily from its chimneys. Livia pulled her shawl tighter, scanning the snow-slicked streets. Her cabin felt a world away, and yet the thought of facing townsfolk who still whispered about her late husband made her stomach twist. Tawaki walked beside her, tall, muscular, and unwavering, the flicker of turquoise jewelry catching the dim light from the overcast sky. Even with the biting cold, he was shirtless beneath his furs, his bronzed skin and rippling muscles a testament to years surviving the wilds. "This is your first time in a town since," Livia began, her voice trailing off. Tawaki's eyes darkened with unspoken memories. "Since my village," he replied quietly. "I move where I must. Always alert, always prepared." As they entered the main street, townsfolk turned their heads. Some eyes held curiosity, others suspicion, and a few whispered under their breaths. Livia felt a mix of embarrassment and anger. She had mourned, survived, and now after so long she had a companion she trusted. And people still stared. The pair pushed open the swinging doors of the frosted spur saloon, the warmth and smell of whiskey and pine smoke washing over them. The room fell into a hush as Tawaki's eyes scanned the patrons. Every man who dared look twice met the unwavering gaze of a warrior who had lived by the land and the hunt. Livia moved toward the counter, whispering her order to the barkeep, but Tawaki's attention was already drawn to a table in the corner. A group of bounty hunters, rugged men with stained coats and hands twitching toward holsters, were talking quietly, yet their intentions were clear. They had been tracking travelers, and the look Tawaki gave them was enough to silence their bravado. "Stay close," he murmured, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Livia's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the raw power in his presence. She had seen his strength in the wilderness, but here, among the townsfolk, it was amplified by his calm confidence. The hunters rose suddenly, one slamming a hand on the table. "We've got business with the widow heart," he sneered. "You can't hide from what's owed." Tawaki didn't move immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, assessing each man with a predator's precision. Then, with sudden speed, he stepped forward, a blur of muscle and motion. The nearest bounty hunter lunged, but Tawaki grabbed his arm, twisting it behind him. Livia gasped as the man grunted, Realizing the warrior's strength was more than human, chaos erupted. Chairs toppled, glasses shattered, and the sound of splintering wood echoed through the saloon. Tawaki moved with controlled efficiency, disarming one man and using the momentum to push him into the wall. Another tried to draw a pistol, but Tawaki's eyes never left his target. With a swift motion, he disarmed the gunman without a single shot fired. Through the melee, Livia realized something remarkable. She had expected terror, danger, and panic, but instead she felt awe, safety, and a strange surge of trust. Tawaki's power was tempered by restraint, his body honed by years in the wild, his mind sharp and unyielding. Within minutes, the bounty hunters had fled into the snowstorm outside, humiliated and beaten, leaving the saloon in stunned silence. Tawaki stepped back toward Livia, brushing a streak of dust from his bronze chest. His dark eyes softened as he regarded her, the tension in his broad shoulders easing slightly. "You are safe," he said simply. "For now." Livia exhaled, the adrenaline leaving her limbs like water draining from a frozen creek. You didn't even touch them," she said, her voice a mixture of awe and relief. "They were not worth harm," he replied, his gaze shifting to the window where snowflakes danced against the fading light. "Only enough to teach respect." For the first time since her husband's death, Livia allowed herself to relax fully, feeling a spark of admiration, attraction, and something deeper, a bond that had begun in the wilderness and now strengthened in the chaos of the town. Tawaki, ever vigilant, remained near her side. A protector, a companion, and perhaps in ways she dared not name. The beginning of something she thought she would never find again. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a soft, quiet blanket. Inside the frosted spur, two lives scarred, solitary, and hardened by the past began weaving together threads of trust, courage, and an unspoken promise of survival and hope. The morning after the saloon fight, the town was still buzzing. Whispers followed Livia wherever she went about the widow who came back with a savage protector, about the Apache whose eyes looked like they'd seen ghosts. But she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt something close to safety. Tawaki had risen before dawn. Livia found him outside the inn, standing at the edge of the frozen river that cut through the valley, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. His long black hair glistened with frost, his bronze chest bare against the cold, his turquoise necklaces catching the first pale light of dawn. "You'll freeze to death out here," she called, pulling her shawl tighter. He didn't turn. "I have known colder," he said simply. "This river hides a spirit." Livia frowned, stepping closer. "A spirit?" He knelt, pressing his palm against the ice. "When I was a boy, our tribe believed the river carried memories. The ones who drowned here spoke to us in dreams. I hear them again now." The stillness of his words sent a shiver down her spine. "Tawaki, do you think your wife?" He nodded before she could finish. "She comes to me in the sound of the water. Last night I saw her, not in anger, but in peace." His voice softened, low and rough. "She told me not to live alone in shadow." Livia's throat tightened. She didn't know whether to be frightened or moved. "Then maybe she's right," she said quietly. "Maybe you're not meant to carry this pain forever." Before he could answer, a cry echoed from across the ice-high, sharp and terrified. A small figure had wandered onto the frozen river. It was a young boy, no older than 8, his boots slipping wildly as the ice began to crack beneath him. Livia gasped. "Oh, dear God, Tawaki!" He was already moving. In one fluid motion, the Apache sprinted across the frozen bank, his muscles coiled with raw power. The sound of cracking ice thundered through the valley as he dove forward, sliding across the surface toward the boy. "Don't move." he shouted, his deep voice carrying like a command from the heavens. The child froze, tears streaming down his red cheeks. Tawaki reached him just as the ice gave way. The world split with a sickening crack, and both plunged into the frigid water. Livia screamed, running toward the bank, her boots slipping, her heart pounding. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then movement. Tawaki burst from the icy hole, dragging the boy against his chest, his hair slicked and frozen, his muscles trembling with effort. With one arm, he pulled them both onto solid ice, gasping, his skin turning blue in the wind. Livia met them halfway, dropping to her knees. "Give him to me," she cried, wrapping her shawl around the shivering child. "Oh Lord, he's breathing. He's breathing." Tawaki didn't answer. He was staring into the distance, his lips trembling not from cold, but from memory. His wife had drowned years ago in a flash flood taken by a river much like this one, and yet, this time, he had pulled life from the same waters that had stolen his past. When they reached the inn, the townsfolk were waiting. No one spoke. They watched as Livia carried the boy inside, and the Apache followed silently, water dripping from his hair and chest, his expression unreadable. Later, as the child slept by the fire, Livia knelt beside Tawaki, who sat on the floor, wrapped in a wool blanket. Steam rose from his bronzed skin, his hair now dry and glinting in the firelight. "You could have died," she said softly. He met her eyes, dark, steady, and infinitely deep. "Then I would have joined her," he said. "But she told me—" "Not yet." Livia's breath caught. "You heard her?" He nodded slowly. "She said my heart still beats for a reason." His gaze lingered on her face. "Now I begin to understand." The silence that followed was thick with something unspoken, something fragile yet undeniable. The flames crackled between them, painting the walls with gold light. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, carrying the ghosts of old grief into the night. And for the first time, Livia saw not just the warrior but the man beneath the scars. The man who had lived through loss and found, in the heart of winter, the faint pulse of hope again. The storm hit that night like a living beast. Snow lashed the windows of the inn, howling through the cracks and shaking the wooden beams. Inside, a small fire burned low, casting soft amber light across the room. Tawaki sat beside it, bare-chested, his bronzed skin glistening faintly from melted snow, his long black hair unbraided, damp strands clinging to his shoulders. The turquoise beads and silver armbands glimmered against the flickering flames, symbols of a life far older than the walls that now sheltered him. Livia entered quietly, her hands clutching a folded blanket. Her face, pale from exhaustion and worry, softened when she saw him sitting there, calm, powerful, yet utterly alone. "You should be resting," she said. "The doctor said you were close to freezing." Tawaki looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "The boy lives. That is what matters." She hesitated, setting the blanket over his shoulders, her fingers brushing his skin. The warmth of him startled her, a living furnace despite the cold that had nearly claimed him. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved me too, more than once. I don't think I've said thank you properly." He turned his head slightly, watching her with quiet intensity. "You owe me nothing, Livia Hart," he said. "You gave me fire when I had none, a place to rest when I had only wind and sky." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe we've both saved each other." Outside, the storm roared louder, snow piling against the windows. The light flickered, and for a long moment, only the sound of crackling logs filled the silence. Livia moved closer to the fire, sitting across from him. "You said you heard your wife," she said softly. "By the river. What did she say?" Tawaki stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. "She said my path was not over, that I was to walk among the living again, Livia's heart tightened. "And do you believe her?" His eyes met hers, dark, deep, and searching. "I want to." He paused. "But sometimes I feel I walk in two worlds. One filled with ghosts, one with light." A log popped in the fire, sending sparks into the air. Livia felt something shift inside her, an ache that was both sorrow and longing. She rose slowly, her voice trembling. "You don't have to walk either world alone, Tawaki." He didn't answer immediately. His hand, strong and scarred, reached toward the flames, then toward her. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was warm, rough from years of labor and battle. Her fingers fit into his as if the world had conspired to bring them to this moment. The storm outside grew furious, rattling the roof. Livia knelt beside him, the firelight painting her skin gold. "I've lived alone since my husband died," she whispered, "and I thought I'd grown used to it. But after you came, it's as if the house itself began breathing again." Tawaki's chest rose and fell slowly. "The heart knows when it finds another beating beside it," he murmured. "It remembers how to live." For a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the whisper of wind and the rhythm of their breaths. His hand still held hers, firm, protective, but not possessive. There was no need for words. The fire spoke for them, its warmth bridging two wounded souls. Finally, Livia leaned her head against his shoulder. "You should sleep," she said softly. "At least for tonight," he nodded, his voice low. "Sleep has not come easy for me since she passed, but maybe." His gaze softened. "Maybe it will tonight." The firelight danced over his bronze skin, highlighting the turquoise around his neck, the quiet strength in his posture. Livia closed her eyes, feeling his heartbeat steady against her. The wind howled, but inside that small room, there was peace, fragile but real. For the first time since the war, since loss, since grief, Tawaki felt something he hadn't known in years, the warmth of belonging. He didn't know if love could bloom from such broken soil, but he knew this. He was no longer walking through life alone. As the flames dimmed, the world outside disappeared into white silence. Inside, two hearts, one scarred by war, the other, by widowhood, found rest beneath the same flickering light. And in the quiet of that long, snowbound night, Tawaki finally closed his eyes, not haunted by ghosts, but held by the living. By dawn, the storm had finally died. Snow lay deep across the valley, glistening under the first rays of sunlight. The world looked untouched, silent, like something reborn. Tawaki opened his eyes slowly, feeling warmth instead of cold for the first time in years. Livia was still beside him, asleep, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just listened to her breathing, to the quiet crackle of the dying fire, to the peace he had thought he'd never know again. When Livia stirred awake, the first thing she saw was him, the Apache warrior who had once walked alone among ghosts, now watching her as if she were something sacred. "Morning," she whispered, her voice soft and raspy. He nodded. "The storm is gone." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's a sign." Tawaki rose, the blanket falling away, his bronzed body catching the pale morning light that spilled through the frosted window. The turquoise and silver ornaments on his chest shimmered faintly, and his long black hair, loose and wild, framed his strong, quiet face. "What will you do now?" Livia asked, standing too. "Will you go back to your people?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He walked to the window, resting his hand against the cold glass. Outside, the boy he'd rescued was playing in the snow with his mother, both alive because of him. "When a man saves a life," he said softly, "he is given two choices: to keep walking alone or to stay and see what that life becomes." Livia stepped closer, her heart beating fast. "And which one will you choose?" Tawaki turned to her, his expression unreadable. All my life I have lived for the dead. My wife, my tribe, my brothers, gone. I thought the spirits wanted me to follow them. He looked toward the fire, his voice deep and rough. But now I think they sent me here, to remember what it feels like to be alive. Livia's eyes filled with quiet tears. You gave me that too, she said. After my husband died, I thought my life was just waiting for the world to forget me. But you came, and suddenly everything changed. Tawaki smiled faintly, the kind of rare smile that carried both strength and sorrow. The river brought me to you. They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher, flooding the cabin with gold light. Every object, the wooden beams, the worn floor, the dying fire, seemed touched by something new and sacred. Then came the knock. Livia froze, startled. Tawaki's head tilted slightly, his instincts sharpening. The door creaked open, and an old man in a fur coat stepped in, his face lined and weary. You're the Apache they've been whispering about, the man said, his voice cautious but not unkind. Tawaki said nothing. The old man nodded toward the river. That boy you saved, he's the mayor's son. The town wants to thank you. They're talking about giving you a place here, work, land even. Livia looked at him hopefully, but Tawaki's face stayed still as stone. The land doesn't belong to men, he said softly. It belongs to the earth. But I will stay until it's time to move again. The old man nodded, tipping his hat. Fair enough. He left, and the door closed softly behind him. Livia turned to Tawaki. You mean that? You'll stay? He met her gaze, steady, strong, and certain. If you'll have me. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Then she stepped forward, placing her hand over his chest. Then stay, she whispered. Not because of the storm or the river or the ghosts. Stay because you want to live again. Tawaki's hand came up to cover hers. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her palm. Then I will. Outside, the valley came alive again, children laughing, horses snorting in the cold air, the sun melting icicles from rooftops. Inside the cabin, Tawaki and Livia stood close. Framed by light and warmth, two souls who had wandered too long through loss and finally found home in each other's presence. Later, when the day had settled into calm, Tawaki walked to the river once more. He knelt beside the thawing edge, dipping his fingers into the cold water. The current whispered softly, the same voice that had once haunted him. But this time, the whisper wasn't of sorrow. It was of peace. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly, murmuring a few words in his native tongue, a farewell to the woman who had once been his past, and a blessing for the one who was now his future. Behind him, Livia stood in the doorway, watching. The wind caught her hair, the sun warmed her face, and she knew neither of them would ever be alone again.